Congratulations, Ms. Richardson.
You need to follow the rules
Skybridge Airlines
right
is officially
now.
yours. The text message glowed on Maya Richardson's phone screen at 6:47 p.m., the bright letters cutting through the dim lighting of Miami International Airport's Gate B-17. Around her, hundreds of travelers moved like tired currents through the terminal's evening chaos. But Maya sat perfectly still in the uncomfortable plastic chair, absorbing the weight of those 12 words. $1.8 billion. Transferred. Done. She owned an airline now. Her 43rd acquisition in 20 years, but somehow this one felt different. Personal. Maya had built Richardson Global Ventures from nothing, literally nothing, unless you counted the $500 in her checking account and a studio apartment in Atlanta 20 years ago. She'd learned early that broken companies were like broken people. They could be fixed, but only if someone cared enough to see past the surface damage to the foundation underneath. Skybridge Airlines was hemorrhaging money, plagued by customer complaints and drowning in employee turnover. The previous board had been so desperate to sell they'd practically thrown themselves at her feet. But Maya hadn't become a billionaire by accepting surface explanations. Numbers told stories, and Skybridge's numbers told a story of something deeper than poor management. She suspected it was cultural rot, the kind that started small, maybe, with one manager who looked at certain passengers differently, one gate agent who made assumptions based on appearance, one flight attendant who decided some people belonged and others didn't. Left unchecked, that rot spread through an organization like cancer poisoning, every interaction, every decision, every moment of human contact. Maya had experienced that poison firsthand too many times to count. At 24, she'd been denied a hotel room in Dallas, despite having a confirmed reservation and a platinum credit card. The desk clerk had looked at her young black face, her casual clothes after a red-eye flight, and decided she was a problem to be managed rather than a customer to be served. She'd slept in her rental car that night, but more importantly, she'd started planning her first business acquisition the next morning. Now, 18 years and billions of dollars later, she was about to find out if Skybridge's problems ran as deep as she suspected. Her phone buzzed again. Carmen Rodriguez, her executive assistant, and the closest thing she had to family, had sent another message. Your flight is boarding in 20 minutes. Seat 1A flight, SK847 to LAX. Try to get some rest. Maya smiled grimly. Rest was the last thing on her mind. Maya Richardson looked like a tired business traveler, which was exactly what she wanted. Her black slacks were wrinkle-resistant but unremarkable. Her white blouse was crisp but not designer, and her comfortable black flats were the kind you could buy at any department store. Her only jewelry was a simple watch, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or power. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her makeup was minimal. She could have been an accountant, a teacher, a nurse, anyone except a billionaire CEO. This anonymity was deliberate. Maya had learned early in her career that people revealed their true nature when they thought no one important was watching. Boardrooms were theaters where everyone performed their best behavior. But gate lounges, hotel lobbies, and restaurant waiting areas, those were stages where the real show happened. She'd built her reputation by fixing failing companies, and she'd learned that most corporate problems weren't really about strategy or finance. They were about culture. About how people treated each other when they thought the boss wasn't looking. About the small daily decisions that either built trust or destroyed it. About respect given freely versus respect that had to be demanded. The Dallas hotel incident had been her awakening. Not just to racism, she'd known about that since childhood growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, but to the business cost of discrimination. That hotel had lost not just her booking that night, but the 3-day corporate retreat she'd been scouting for her then-employer. 40 rooms, meals, conference space. Because one night clerk had looked at a young black woman and seen a problem instead of a customer. She'd started tracking those stories. How many black executives chose different airlines after being profiled at security? How many Latino families avoided certain restaurant chains after being seated near the kitchen one too many times? How many Asian entrepreneurs took their conferences elsewhere after being treated like tourists instead of decision makers? The numbers were staggering. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was a massive business opportunity waiting for someone smart enough to recognize it. Maya had built Richardson Global by acquiring companies with cultural problems, then fixing them by changing how people were treated. Not through sensitivity training or corporate slogans, but through accountability. Real consequences for real behavior. She'd fire someone for treating customers differently based on appearance just as quickly as she'd fire them for stealing money, because ultimately both were theft. Her success rate spoke for itself. 22 acquisitions, 22 turnarounds. Companies that had been losing money became profitable. Brands that had been toxic became trusted. Organizations that had been hemorrhaging talent became places people fought to work. But Skybridge felt different, personal. Maybe because airlines were where discrimination happened most publicly, where bias played out in front of dozens of witnesses, where a passenger's worst moment could be filmed and broadcast to millions within hours. She'd flown commercially exactly twice in the past 5 years, both times on business trips where taking her private jet would have sent the wrong message. Both times she'd been treated with the kind of suspicious attention that made her skin crawl. Flight attendants who scrutinized her ticket twice. Gate agents who asked additional questions. Security personnel who seemed to take special interest in her carry-on bag. She was worth $2.3 billion. She owned companies that employed 40,000 people. She had degrees from Spelman and Harvard board seats at 3 nonprofits and a track record that spoke for itself. But at 30,000 feet, all of that disappeared. She became just another black woman who might or might not belong in first class. Tonight, she was going to find out if Skybridge was different. And if it wasn't, she was going to fix it. The hard way. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria Santos, her head of corporate investigations. Complete background checks on flight SK-847 crew completed. Sending files now. Some interesting patterns in customer complaints. Maya's jaw tightened. Patterns. That was corporate speak for what she suspected she was about to experience firsthand. She stood up, shouldering her simple leather carry-on bag. Around her, other passengers were gathering their belongings as the pre-boarding announcement echoed through the gate area. She watched them carefully, their clothes, their confidence, the way gate agents and airline staff interacted with them. A white businessman in an expensive suit approached the gate with his boarding pass already on his phone. The agent smiled immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Patterson. Thank you for flying with us tonight." An elderly Latina woman with a paper boarding pass approached next. The same agent's smile became professional distant. "Boarding pass and ID, please." A thorough examination followed. Maya filed the interaction away. She'd seen this pattern hundreds of times. The subtle but unmistakable difference in treatment. The warmth reserved for some, the suspicion offered to others. She'd bought Skybridge to fix problems like this, but first she needed to confirm they existed. Miami International Airport at 7:15 p.m. was a symphony of controlled chaos. Flight announcements echoed over conversations in a dozen languages, while tired travelers dragged wheeled bags across polished floors that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting. The air carried a mixture of coffee, fast food, and that particular airport scent of recycling air and human stress. Maya positioned herself near the gate's customer service desk, close enough to observe the interactions between Skybridge staff and passengers. She'd learned to read these dynamics like financial statements, the subtle patterns that revealed organizational health or sickness. Jennifer Walsh, the gate agent, was a study in contrasts. With white passengers, particularly well-dressed ones, her interactions were smooth and efficient. She smiled, made small talk about weather and destinations, and processed boarding passes with minimal scrutiny. Her body language was open, welcoming. But Maya watched her stiffen slightly when a young black man in a hoodie approached with his boarding pass. The smile became more forced, the examination of his ticket more thorough. "Can I see your ID as well?" she asked, though she hadn't requested identification from the previous 3 passengers. The young man complied without complaint, but Maya saw the recognition in his eyes. He knew what was happening. He'd probably experienced it dozens of times before. Next came a Hispanic family with 3 children. The father handed over multiple boarding passes, clearly nervous about managing the logistics of traveling with young kids. Jennifer's efficiency became mechanical. No smile, no reassurance about the gate location or boarding time, just processing. Maya made mental notes. These weren't necessarily malicious acts. Jennifer might not even be consciously aware of her behavior patterns. But that was almost worse. Unconscious bias was harder to address because people could honestly claim they were treating everyone the same. She pulled out her phone and opened a voice memo app. "Gate B17 observations," she spoke quietly. "Staff member Jennifer Walsh exhibiting differential treatment patterns based on passenger appearance. Documented at least 3 instances of elevated scrutiny for minority passengers versus streamlined processing for white passengers." Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Carmen flight crew backgrounds attached. "Lead flight attendant Rebecca Morrison has 12 customer complaints filed in past 18 months. All dismissed by management. Complainants were predominantly minority passengers." Maya's eyebrows rose. 12 complaints dismissed. That wasn't random chance or isolated incidents. That was a pattern of behavior being protected by management. She opened the attached files, scrolling through the complaints. A black businessman claimed Rebecca had questioned the authenticity of his first-class ticket. A Latina doctor said Rebecca had refused to store her medical bag in the overhead bin, claiming it violated safety regulations, though she'd watched white passengers store larger items without comment. An elderly Asian man reported being told his emotional support animal wasn't welcome despite having proper documentation. All complaints dismissed. All complainants offered vouchers for future flights in lieu of investigation. Maya's blood pressure began to rise. This wasn't just poor training or isolated incidents. This was institutional protection of discriminatory behavior. The kind of corporate culture rot she'd seen destroy companies from the inside. Her phone rang. Maria Santos. "Maya, I've got more information on the SK-847 crew." Maria's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Rebecca Morrison isn't just collecting complaints. She's part of an informal network of flight attendants who have group chats about problem passengers. I've got screenshots." "Send them to me," Maya said, walking to a quieter corner of the gate area. "You're not going to like what you see. They use coded language, but it's pretty clear they're profiling passengers based on race, age, and apparent economic status. They call it cabin management strategy." Maya's jaw clenched. Cabin management strategy. Corporate speak for deciding who belonged and who didn't based on appearance. "There's more," Maria continued. "Captain James Mitchell has been flying with Morrison for 3 years. Several complaints about his behavior too, all dismissed. And get this, the pilot union has been fighting every attempt to implement bias training. Mitchell's been one of the most vocal opponents." Maya looked up as the boarding announcement began. First-class passengers and Sky Elite members were now ready to begin boarding flight SK-847 to Los Angeles. "I have to go," she told Maria. "Keep investigating, and Maria, start recording everything. I have a feeling we're going to need documentation." She hung up and joined the small line of first-class passengers. There were maybe 15 people ahead of her, mostly white, mostly well-dressed, mostly carrying themselves with the casual confidence of people accustomed to preferential treatment. Maya studied their interactions with Jennifer as they approached the boarding gate. Warm smiles, quick scans of boarding passes, cheerful wishes for good flights. Then it was her turn. Jennifer's professional smile faltered slightly as she took in Maya's appearance. Simple clothes, unassuming demeanor, and most notably dark skin. the kind of passenger who, in Jennifer's experience, often had problems with their tickets. "Boarding pass, please," Jennifer said, her tone shifting from warm to neutral. Maya held up her phone with the digital pass displayed. Jennifer took longer than necessary to scan it, her eyes moving between the screen and Maya's face as if confirming something. "First class seat 1A, Jennifer said, and Maya caught the slight question mark in her voice. "That's correct," Maya replied evenly. Jennifer handed back the phone with a forced smile. "Have a good flight," she said, but her eyes were already moving to the next passenger in line. Maya walked down the jet bridge, her mind racing. The pattern was already starting. The subtle questioning, the implied disbelief, the extra scrutiny. And she hadn't even reached the aircraft yet. She could already predict what was waiting for her in the cabin. The jet bridge stretched ahead of Maya like a tunnel toward truth. Each step on the textured metal flooring brought her closer to what she suspected would be a defining moment, not just for her personally, but for the 43,000 employees of Skybridge Airlines who didn't yet know their company had a new owner. The Airbus A330 was a beautiful aircraft, she had to admit. Clean lines, modern interior, the kind of plane that should have been a source of pride for its crew. Maya paused at the aircraft door, noting the Skybridge logo painted in elegant silver letters along the fuselage. Soon she'd be responsible for ensuring that logo represented something worthy of respect. 2 flight attendants stood at the entrance. The younger one, a Hispanic man whose name tag read Diego, offered a genuine smile to the passengers ahead of her, but it was the older woman beside him who caught Maya's attention. Rebecca Morrison was exactly what central casting would order for a veteran flight attendant. Blonde hair sprayed into an immobile helmet, red lipstick applied with geometric precision, and a smile that managed to be both bright and cold simultaneously. She greeted each passenger with practiced efficiency, but Maya was watching for the subtle variations in treatment she'd learned to recognize. A silver-haired man in an Armani suit approached the door ahead of Maya. Rebecca's smile intensified to nearly blinding levels. "Welcome aboard, sir. Thank you so much for choosing Skybridge tonight. Can I get you settled with a pre-departure champagne?" The next passenger, a white woman in business attire, received similarly warm treatment. "Good evening. Right this way to first class. We'll have you comfortable in no time." Then Maya stepped forward. Rebecca's smile didn't just fade, it transformed. The warmth drained from her eyes as she performed a quick but thorough visual assessment. Maya watched those eyes travel from her practical shoes up her simple slacks, pause at her unremarkable blouse, and settle on her face with something that wasn't quite suspicion, but wasn't far from it. "Boarding pass," Rebecca said, her voice losing all its previous warmth. Maya held up her phone. Rebecca grabbed it more forcefully than necessary, her fingers brushing Maya's as she angled the screen to catch the light. Maya noted the change in physical contact where she'd barely touched the previous passenger's devices. Now she was gripping Maya's phone as if examining evidence. "Seat 1A. Rebecca said the words heavy with disbelief. "That's correct," Maya replied, her voice level and professional. Rebecca looked from the phone screen to Maya, then past her as if expecting someone else to appear. Some explanation for why this particular passenger would have access to the most premium seat on the aircraft. Was all Rebecca said as she handed the phone back. But as Maya stepped past her into the aircraft, she heard Rebecca's voice drop to a whisper directed at Diego. "Check the manifest again." "I think we have a system glitch." Maya's heart rate increased, but she kept her expression neutral. "A system glitch. Not let me verify this reservation, or there might be an error. A system glitch." As if the only possible explanation for her presence in first class was computer malfunction. She stepped into the aircraft's interior, and the familiar layout of premium air travel spread before her. 8 first-class seats arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each one a private pod designed for comfort and privacy. The lighting was warm and welcoming, the cabin immaculate. But Maya's attention was immediately drawn to seat 1A, her seat, which was currently occupied. A white man in his mid-40s sat sprawled across the leather, his shoes kicked off and feet propped on the bulkhead wall. He was wearing a loud polo shirt with a designer logo and cargo shorts that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. His phone was pressed to his ear, and he was speaking loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Yeah, I told him if you want premium, you pay for premium," he was saying into the device, gesturing broadly with his free hand. "No freebies in my business." Maya stopped and looked up at the seat number display. 1A. She checked her boarding pass on her phone. 1A. She looked at the man again who had noticed her standing there and was looking at her with mild annoyance. "Can I help you?" he asked, not bothering to lower his phone. "I believe you're in my seat," Maya said calmly, keeping her voice level and professional. The man Maya decided to think of him as Brad until she learned his real name scoffed audibly. "No, I'm in 1A. Been sitting here for 10 minutes. My boarding pass says 1A as well," Maya replied, holding up her phone so he could see the screen. Brad glanced at it dismissively. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of mix-up you've got, but this is definitely my seat. Maybe you should check with the flight attendant." That was exactly the moment Rebecca Morrison chose to enter the first-class cabin. Rebecca's eyes immediately locked onto the scene. Maya standing in the aisle, Brad lounging comfortably in seat 1A, and the obvious tension crackling between them. Without hesitation, Rebecca bypassed Maya entirely and addressed Brad directly. "Is there a problem, Mr. Kellerman?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern and artificial sweetness. "Can I get you that champagne I promised Maya?" Filed away the name Brad Kellerman and noted Rebecca's immediate assumption about who was the real passenger and who was the problem. No questions asked, no attempt to understand the situation. Just automatic support for the white man and dismissal of the black woman. "Yeah, this lady thinks this is her seat," Brad said, gesturing at Maya with the same casualness he might use to indicate a piece of misplaced luggage. "She's holding up the line." Maya looked around the cabin. There was no line. The other first-class passengers had already found their seats and were settling in. But she understood Brad's strategy: frame her as an obstruction to everyone else's comfort, make her the problem that needed to be resolved quickly. Rebecca turned to Maya, and all pretense of customer service professionalism vanished. She crossed her arms and fixed Maya with a stare that was equal parts annoyance and disdain. "Ma'am, there must be a mistake. What is your seat assignment?" "My assignment is 1A," Maya said, holding up her phone again. "As I just showed you at the door." Rebecca made an elaborate show of squinting at the phone screen, tilting her head and frowning as if the information displayed there was somehow suspect. The performance was so obvious that Maya wondered if Rebecca had forgotten she was being watched by a cabin full of passengers. "The system must have double-booked," Rebecca declared, as if this explained everything. "It happens. Mr. Kellerman is one of our Platinum Elite members, and he's already settled." Maya felt a familiar chill settle in her stomach. Not anger yet, that would come later, but the cold recognition of a moment that would define everything that followed. She was at a crossroads now, and how she handled the next 60 seconds would determine not just her own experience but the future of every Skybridge employee. "I am also a ticketed first-class passenger," Maya stated clearly. "My name is Maya Richardson. My seat is 1A. This man is in it. Please ask him to move." The directness of her command seemed to enrage Rebecca. It was the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed, and to Rebecca this woman didn't look like someone who should be giving orders to anyone, let alone airline staff. But Maya was watching Diego, the younger flight attendant, who had positioned himself near the galley and was clearly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing. His eyes moved between Rebecca and Maya, and she could see the internal conflict playing out on his face. He knew this was wrong, but he was trapped between doing the right thing and keeping his job. Rebecca leaned closer to Maya, lowering her voice to a conspirative whisper that was still loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Look, I don't know what kind of ticket you think you have or how you got it, but this is the first-class cabin. Mr. Kellerman is settled. We can't just move him." Maya held Rebecca's gaze steadily. In that moment, she made her decision. Maya stood in the aisle of the first-class cabin, her carry-on bag at her feet, watching Brad Kellerman sprawl across her seat like he owned not just the chair but the entire aircraft. His conversation continued unabated, his voice carrying across the small space with the confidence of someone who had never been told he didn't belong anywhere. "Trust me. Becca hooked me up," he was saying into his phone, his feet still propped on the bulkhead. "Friend of mine from the country club. She knows how to take care of people who matter." The words hit Maya like ice water. Becca. The diminutive of Rebecca. This wasn't a system error or a double booking. This was a deliberate upgrade given to a friend, and now Rebecca was protecting that favoritism by removing Maya from the equation. Maya looked around the cabin, taking inventory of the other passengers. A Hollywood producer type in seat 2A was pretending to read a script while obviously listening to the confrontation. An older couple in seats 3A and 3B had paused their conversation to watch. A tech entrepreneur in seat 4A had his phone out, either texting or preparing to record. They were all watching. Some with curiosity, some with discomfort, but all clearly aware that something significant was happening. Brad finally ended his call and looked up at Maya with the kind of irritated expression usually reserved for slow elevators or long lines. "Look, I don't know what your deal is, but I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. This is my seat now." Maya's voice remained perfectly level. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" "What?" "Why would I?" "Because I'd like to verify that you're actually assigned to this seat," Maya said calmly. "Since there seems to be some confusion." Brad's face flushed red. "I don't need to show you anything. You're not airline staff." "You're right," Maya agreed. "I'm a passenger with a confirmed reservation for seat 1A. If you have the same reservation, then we need airline staff to resolve the conflict. If you don't have a reservation for this seat, then you need to move." The logic was simple and irrefutable. Brad's response confirmed what Maya already suspected. "Rebecca," he called loudly. "Rebecca, can you deal with this?" The use of the flight attendant's first name, the casual assumption that she would deal with another passenger. The entitled tone, it all painted a clear picture of someone accustomed to special treatment. Rebecca appeared from the galley, her face already set in lines of annoyance. But Maya noticed that her irritation was directed entirely at Maya, not at the man who was shouting across the cabin. "Mr. Kellerman, is everything all right?" Rebecca asked, her voice shifting back to that artificially sweet tone. "I'm so sorry about this disruption." Maya watched the interaction carefully. Rebecca's body language was protective, almost defensive of Brad. She positioned herself slightly between him and Maya, creating a physical barrier that spoke volumes about where her loyalties lay. "This woman won't stop harassing me," Brad said, his voice taking on a wounded quality. "I'm just trying to relax before takeoff, and she keeps insisting this is her seat." Harassment. Maya filed that word away. It was a deliberate escalation designed to frame her as the aggressor, rather than a passenger seeking her assigned seat. "Ma'am," Rebecca said, turning to Maya with barely concealed hostility. "As I explained, there's been a system error. Mr. Kellerman is already settled, and we need to resolve this quickly so we can depart on time." Maya noted the emphasis on quick resolution and on-time departure. Rebecca was trying to create urgency to pressure Maya into accepting whatever solution would be easiest for the crew, rather than what was actually correct. "I understand your desire for efficiency," Maya said. "But efficiency can't override accuracy. If there's truly been a double booking, Then airline protocol requires verification of both passengers' documentation. I've shown you my boarding pass. I'd like to see Mr. Kellerman's. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She clearly hadn't expected Maya to know airline protocols, or to speak with such authority. Our elite members don't always carry paper boarding passes, Rebecca said, her tone becoming more defensive. Then perhaps you could check his reservation in your system, Maya suggested, or contact the gate to verify his upgrade authorization. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Maya could see Rebecca calculating, trying to figure out how to resolve this situation without revealing the truth about Brad's unauthorized presence in the seat. The other passengers were no longer pretending not to listen. The confrontation had escalated beyond what could be ignored, and Maya was aware that every word and gesture was being observed and judged. Mr. Kellerman has been a valued Skybridge customer for years, Rebecca said finally. His platinum status speaks for itself. I'm sure it does, Maya replied, and I'm equally sure that platinum status doesn't supersede seat assignments. If he's assigned to 1A, then I need to be moved to my correct seat. If I'm assigned to 1A, then he needs to move. It's really quite simple. But even as she said the words, Maya knew nothing about this situation was going to be simple. Rebecca Morrison had worked for Skybridge Airlines for 25 years. She'd started as a junior flight attendant on domestic routes and worked her way up to lead attendant on international flights. She'd seen company mergers, management changes, and countless passengers who thought they knew better than experienced crew members. What she saw standing before her was another entitled passenger trying to make problems where none existed. The woman's calm demeanor and articulate speech patterns actually made Rebecca more suspicious, not less. In her experience, the passengers who caused the most trouble were often the ones who seemed most reasonable at first. "Ma'am," she said, her voice taking on the kind of forced patience usually reserved for difficult children. "I've been doing this job for a long time." When the computer double books seats, which happens more than you might think, we resolve it based on check-in times and passenger status. Mr. Kellerman checked in first and has elite status. That means he gets seat preference. Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. "And you verified his check-in time?" How Rebecca's pause was barely perceptible, but Maya caught it. "Our system shows his priority status." "That's not what I asked," Maya said gently. "I asked how you verified his check-in time, since that's the basis for your seating decision." The passengers in nearby seats were now openly watching the exchange. Maya could see phones being discreetly positioned, though no one was obviously recording yet. But she knew that could change quickly if the confrontation escalated. Rebecca's face was beginning to flush with anger. She clearly wasn't accustomed to having her decisions questioned so methodically. "Ma'am, I don't need to justify airline procedures to passengers," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I've explained the situation. Mr. Kellerman is settled in his seat. I can find you an excellent alternative accommodation." "What alternative accommodation?" Maya asked. Rebecca gestured vaguely toward the back of the aircraft. "We have several premium economy seats available. Very comfortable, and I can arrange complimentary drinks for the inconvenience. Premium economy." Maya felt a cold anger beginning to build in her chest. Not first class, not even business class, but premium economy. The message was clear. Your kind of person should be grateful for whatever we're willing to give you, Rebecca, Maya said, using the flight attendant's first name deliberately. "Let me make sure I understand. I have a confirmed paid reservation for seat 1A. But you want me to accept a seat in a different class of service because it would be more convenient for you." The use of her first name seemed to surprise Rebecca. Passengers usually called flight attendants Miss or used their titles. The familiarity suggested a level of confidence that didn't match Rebecca's assessment of Maya's status. "The seat I'm offering is very nice," Rebecca said, her voice becoming more defensive. "And as I said, I'll include complimentary beverages." Maya looked around the cabin. "Rebecca, what's the price difference between first class and premium economy on this route?" That's not really relevant." It's about $800, isn't it? Maya continued. So you're asking me to accept an $800 downgrade in service with compensation of maybe $40 worth of drinks? Rebecca's face was now clearly flushed. Ma'am, I'm trying to be helpful here. I appreciate that, Maya said, but helpful would be ensuring I receive the service I paid for. What you're offering is not helpful, it's discriminatory. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Rebecca's eyes widened and Maya could see the defensive anger building. That is completely uncalled for, Rebecca snapped. I don't discriminate against anyone. I treat all passengers equally. Do you? Maya asked quietly. Because I watched you greet the passengers ahead of me. They all received warm welcomes, immediate champagne offers, and assistance getting settled. When I presented the same boarding pass type, you questioned its validity. When I appeared at my assigned seat and found it occupied, you immediately assumed I was the problem rather than investigating the situation. And now you're asking me to accept inferior service while the man in my seat, who still hasn't shown you his boarding pass, keeps that seat. If this is equal treatment, I'd hate to see what discrimination looks like. Maya's voice had remained calm throughout her analysis, but the logic was devastating. Several passengers were now nodding slightly, clearly recognizing the accuracy of her observations. Diego, the young flight attendant, had been standing near the galley throughout the exchange, his discomfort becoming more obvious by the minute. Maya could see him glancing between Rebecca and the passengers, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Rebecca realized she was losing control of the situation. The other passengers were beginning to side with Maya, and her justifications were starting to sound hollow even to her own ears. She made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Ma'am, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this is my cabin and I decide who sits where. You can take the seat I'm offering or you can get off this aircraft. Those are your only options. The threat was clear and unmistakable, and it was exactly what Maya had been waiting for. The cabin fell into a silence so complete that the only sounds were the distant hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and the soft clicking of passengers typing on their phones. Maya could feel the weight of multiple gazes fixed on her, waiting to see how she would respond to Rebecca's ultimatum. Maya had been in this moment before, not exactly this situation, but this type of moment. The crossroads where someone in a position of minor authority decided to test whether she would fight back or quietly accept mistreatment. She'd learned over the years that how she handled these moments defined not just her own experience, but often the experiences of everyone who came after her. Rebecca, Maya said, her voice perfectly level. Did you just threaten to have me removed from this aircraft for requesting the seat I paid for? Rebecca's face was now openly hostile. The pretense of customer service had evaporated completely. I didn't threaten anything. I gave you options. You can cooperate with crew instructions or you can find another flight. Maya nodded slowly. I see. And what crew instruction am I failing to cooperate with? You're disrupting other passengers and refusing to accept the accommodation we've offered. Maya looked around the cabin. Mr. Kellerman, am I disrupting you? Brad looked uncomfortable for the first time since the confrontation began. He clearly hadn't expected to be drawn directly into the conversation. Well, I just want to get to L.A. Of course, Maya said, and you can do that from your assigned seat, which is what exactly Rebecca took care of my seating. Maya turned back to Rebecca. So, Mr. Kellerman doesn't know his seat assignment. He just knows that you took care of his seating. Which suggests what exactly Rebecca's eyes darted between Maya and the other passengers who were now obviously listening to every word. She was trapped in a logic puzzle of her own creation, and Maya was dealing with it piece by piece. Elite members receive priority seating, Rebecca said weakly. Absolutely, Maya agreed. Elite members receive the seats they reserve and pay for. just like all passengers. What they don't receive is the right to occupy seats assigned to other passengers. Unless, of course, you're suggesting that elite status supersedes confirmed reservations. The Hollywood producer in seat 2A had stopped pretending to read his script and was now watching the confrontation with obvious fascination. Maya could see him typing rapidly on his phone, whether texting friends or posting to social media, she couldn't tell. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice," Rebecca said, trying to regain some authority. Maya's voice had never risen above a conversational tone. "Rebecca, my voice is perfectly modulated, but I think you're feeling defensive because you know your position is indefensible." That was when Rebecca made her fatal mistake. She looked at Maya's simple clothes, her unremarkable appearance, her calm demeanor in the face of authority, and she made an assumption based on decades of experience with passengers who looked like Maya. Passengers who in her mind were more likely to be problems than solutions. Passengers who needed to be managed rather than served. "Look," she said, leaning closer and dropping her voice to what she clearly thought was a reasonable tone. "I don't know how you got that boarding pass, and I don't really care. Maybe you found it. Maybe someone gave it to you. Maybe there was some kind of mistake when you booked. But this is the first-class cabin. These seats are for our premium customers, people who fly with us regularly and spend serious money on tickets." She straightened up and gestured toward the curtain separating the cabins. "Now I'm sure we can find you a perfectly nice seat in the back where you'll be comfortable with people more like you. I can even throw in a couple of drink vouchers for your trouble." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya felt a familiar chill settle over her, not the cold of fear, but the crystalline clarity that came when someone revealed exactly who they were. "People more like you," Rebecca had just said in front of a cabin full of witnesses that Maya didn't belong in first class because of how she looked, because people like her belonged in the back of the plane with their own kind. Maya looked around the cabin. Every passenger was staring now, their faces showing various combinations of shock, discomfort, and anger. The tech entrepreneur had his phone out and was clearly recording. The older couple looked appalled. Even Brad appeared uncomfortable with what he'd just heard. Maya turned back to Rebecca, who seemed to be slowly realizing the magnitude of what she'd just said. The flight attendant's face was cycling through expressions, defiance, uncertainty, and the beginning of panic. "Rebecca," Maya said, her voice now carrying an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. "Did you just tell me that I don't belong in first class because of what I look like?" "That's not what I said," Rebecca protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "You said these seats are for premium customers, and that I should sit in the back with people more like me. What exactly did you mean by that?" Rebecca's mouth opened and closed without sound. She was clearly trying to find words that would walk back what she'd just said without admitting the obvious racism in her statement. I meant people with similar ticket types," she said weakly. Maya pulled out her phone and held up the boarding pass. "First class seat 1A. What kind of ticket do you think this is? But you don't look like." Rebecca started, then stopped, realizing she was about to make things even worse. "I don't look like what, Rebecca?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, because everyone in the cabin knew exactly what Rebecca had been about to say. Maya didn't look like the kind of person who belonged in first class. She didn't look like she could afford it. She didn't look like she deserved it. She looked like the kind of person who belonged in the back of the plane. Maya felt the familiar fire building in her chest. She'd spent 20 years building a business empire, had acquired dozens of companies, employed thousands of people, and was worth more than most small countries' GDP. But in Rebecca's eyes, she was just another black woman who needed to know her place. The irony was almost too perfect. Rebecca was about to learn exactly who she was dealing with. But not yet. Maya had learned patience. She'd learned to let people reveal themselves completely before she acted. "Rebecca," she said softly, "I think you should call your supervisor." Rebecca's face had progressed through several shades of red and was now settling into a blotchy pattern that suggested her blood pressure was approaching dangerous levels. She clearly hadn't expected Maya to be so articulate, so persistent, or so immune to intimidation. "Ma'am, I am the supervisor for this cabin," Rebecca said, trying to regain her authority. "And I'm offering you a reasonable solution to resolve this situation quickly." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "You're right that you're in charge of this cabin. But let me ask you something. When you make decisions about passenger seating, what criteria do you use?" "We follow company policy." "Specifically?" Maya interrupted gently. "What factors determine who gets priority when there's a seating conflict?" Rebecca glanced around the cabin, clearly uncomfortable with having her decision-making process examined so publicly. "Time of check-in, elite status, special circumstances." "Have you verified Mr. Kellerman's check-in time?" "He's an elite member." "That wasn't my question." "Have you verified when he checked in for this flight?" Rebecca's pause told Maya everything she needed to know. "Elite members have priority regardless." "Actually, they don't," Maya said calmly. "According to Department of Transportation regulations, confirmed seat assignments take priority over status upgrades. Elite status can qualify you for complimentary upgrades to available seats, but it cannot displace passengers with confirmed reservations." The cabin was now completely silent, except for the soft tapping of passengers typing on their phones. Maya was aware that this conversation was likely being live tweeted, posted to Instagram stories, and possibly broadcast on social media platforms to thousands of followers. Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I don't need a lecture on aviation regulations from passengers." "You're absolutely right," Maya agreed. "You should already know them. But since there seems to be some confusion, let me clarify. I have a confirmed paid reservation for seat 1A. Mr. Kellerman appears to have received an unauthorized upgrade to that same seat. Company policy requires you to honor confirmed reservations." This isn't a complex situation. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, maybe I should just—" "No," Rebecca said quickly, shooting him a look. "You're settled." "Ma'am," she turned back to Maya, "I understand you're frustrated, but I'm offering you a perfectly good alternative. Premium economy is very comfortable, and with the drink vouchers, you're actually getting additional value." Maya almost smiled. "Rebecca, are you seriously trying to convince me that a seat downgrade plus $40 worth of alcohol equals additional value? Premium economy has more legroom than regular economy, but less legroom than first class, less recline than first class, less service than first class, and significantly less privacy than first class." Maya's voice remained perfectly level. "You're asking me to accept inferior service and be grateful for it. Why do you think that's reasonable?" Rebecca's frustration was becoming obvious to everyone in the cabin. "Because sometimes passengers need to be flexible." "Do they?" Maya asked. "When was the last time you asked a white passenger to be flexible about their seat assignment?" The question hit like a slap. Rebecca's eyes widened, and Maya could see her mentally scrambling for an answer. That's not relevant, isn't it? You've had, 15 passengers board before me, all of them white, all of them seated without question. I'm the first black passenger you've encountered, and suddenly there's a seating conflict that requires me to be flexible. Can you see how that might look?" Diego, the young flight attendant who had been silent throughout the confrontation, took a step forward. Maya could see the internal struggle on his face. He wanted to speak up, but he was terrified of contradicting his supervisor. "Rebecca," he said quietly. "Maybe we should." "Diego," Rebecca snapped. "Please prepare the cabin for departure." Maya noticed the dismissal and filed it away. Rebecca wasn't just discriminating against passengers. She was silencing potential allies among her own crew. "Rebecca," Maya said, "I'd like you to call the captain." "That's not necessary, I think it is." You've made several statements that I believe violate both company policy and federal anti-discrimination laws. I'd like the captain to review this situation before we proceed." Rebecca's face went pale. "You're threatening to file complaints. I'm not threatening anything," Maya said calmly. "I'm stating that I believe laws have been violated, and I want the situation reviewed by the senior officer on this aircraft before it goes any further." The Hollywood producer in seat 2A leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me, but I've been filming this entire conversation." "Ma'am," he nodded to Maya, "you've been nothing but professional. The treatment you're receiving is completely unacceptable." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Other passengers were nodding, and Maya could see several more phones being discreetly positioned to record. Rebecca realized she was losing the room. The other passengers were siding with Maya, and her authority was being undermined in front of everyone. "Sir, filming without consent is prohibited," she started. "Actually, it's not," the producer said. "There's no expectation of privacy in an aircraft cabin, and I'm documenting what appears to be discriminatory behavior by airline staff." Rebecca looked around the cabin desperately. She'd started this confrontation confident in her authority and certain that Maya would eventually back down. Now she was facing a passenger who knew airline regulations better than she did a cabin full of witnesses who were clearly on Maya's side, and multiple recordings of her behavior. She made another decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. "Ma'am, if you don't accept the accommodation I'm offering, I'm going to have to ask you to leave this aircraft." The threat was clear, unmistakable, and completely inappropriate. Maya felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. "Are you removing me from this flight?" she asked. "I'm asking you to cooperate with crew instructions. Your instruction is for me to give up my paid seat and accept inferior service. Is that correct? I'm asking you to be reasonable. And if I refuse to be reasonable by your definition," Rebecca's face was now openly hostile, "then you can find another flight." Maya nodded slowly. "I see. And this decision is based on what exactly? Failure to comply with crew instructions. Which instruction specifically?" "The instruction to give up my confirmed seat assignment. The instruction to accept a service downgrade, or the instruction to sit in the back with people more like me." Rebecca's face went white as she realized Maya was creating a clear record of the discrimination. "I never said." "You said these seats are for premium customers, and I should sit in the back with people more like me. Would you like me to play the recording?" Maya held up her phone, and Rebecca's eyes widened as she realized the entire conversation had been documented. That was when Captain James Mitchell chose to enter the cabin. Captain Mitchell appeared from the cockpit like a knight arriving to rescue his flight attendant, but his entrance immediately revealed everything Maya needed to know about the culture of this crew. He walked directly to Rebecca without even acknowledging Maya's presence, his body language protective and supportive of his crew member rather than neutral and investigative. "Everything all right here, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of 25 years of flying and the confidence of someone who had never been questioned about his judgments. Maya watched the interaction carefully. Mitchell was in his mid-50s, silver-haired with the kind of military bearing that suggested either military service or a desire to project military-style authority. He wore his captain's uniform like armor, and his immediate alignment with Rebecca told Maya everything she needed to know about his leadership style. "Captain, we have a passenger who's refusing to cooperate with seating arrangements," Rebecca said, her voice taking on a victim's tone now that reinforcements had arrived. Mitchell turned to Maya for the first time, and she caught the quick assessment in his eyes. Middle-aged black woman, simply dressed, standing in first class, looking like she didn't belong. His expression settled into the patient condescension usually reserved for difficult customers. "Ma'am, I understand there's been some confusion about seating," he said, his voice carrying the kind of forced reasonableness that suggested he'd already decided how this would end. "My crew has advised me there's a duplicate booking situation, and they've offered you alternative accommodations." Maya noticed several things immediately. First, Mitchell had accepted Rebecca's version of events without question. Second, he'd framed Maya as the source of confusion rather than the victim of it. Third, he'd positioned himself physically so that he and Rebecca were facing Maya together, creating a visual representation of us versus them. Captain Maya said calmly, "There's been no confusion on my part. I have a confirmed reservation for seat 1A. Your flight attendant has acknowledged this. The confusion seems to be about whether confirmed reservations are honored on your aircraft." Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. He clearly hadn't expected such an articulate response. "Ma'am, when we have conflicting claims to the same seat, we resolve them based on check-in priority and passenger status. Has anyone verified Mr. Kellerman's check-in time or his reservation?" Maya interrupted gently. Mitchell glanced at Rebecca, who was suddenly studying her fingernails with intense concentration. "I'm sure my crew has followed proper procedures. I'm sure they have as well," Maya said. "So it should be simple to verify. Could you please check Mr. Kellerman's reservation in your system?" The request was reasonable and straightforward, but Maya could see Mitchell's discomfort. He clearly hadn't expected to be drawn into a procedural discussion. In his experience, passengers either accepted crew decisions or they were removed from the aircraft. "Ma'am, I don't need to justify our procedures to passengers," he said, his voice taking on an edge. "My crew has made a decision based on their professional judgment, and I support that decision." Maya nodded. "So you're supporting their decision without reviewing the facts that led to it. I trust my crew." "That's admirable loyalty," Maya said. "But what happens when your crew makes decisions based on assumptions rather than facts?" Mitchell's face was beginning to flush. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to accept the accommodation you've been offered so we can depart on time." Maya looked around the cabin. Every passenger was now openly watching the confrontation. The tech entrepreneur was still recording, and she could see other phones positioned to capture the scene. "Captain, let me ask you a direct question. Are you ordering me to give up my confirmed seat assignment and accept inferior service? I'm ordering you to comply with crew instructions, which are—" Mitchell glanced at Rebecca again, clearly wishing he'd stayed in the cockpit. "You've been offered alternative seating. In a different class of service," Maya finished. "So, yes, you're ordering me to accept inferior service. May I ask why? Because that's what's required to resolve this situation." Maya's voice remained perfectly level. "Captain, have you reviewed the federal regulations regarding confirmed reservations versus status upgrades?" Mitchell's pause was telling. "Ma'am, I've been flying for 25 years. That's not what I asked." "Have you reviewed the specific regulations that govern this situation?" "I don't need to review regulations to know how to run my aircraft." Maya felt a chill of satisfaction. Mitchell was making the same mistake Rebecca had made, assuming his authority superseded actual policy. "Actually, Captain, you do. Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations requires airlines to honor confirmed reservations except in specific circumstances. Passenger status is not one of those circumstances. Would you like me to cite the specific regulation?" Mitchell's face was now openly hostile. He clearly hadn't expected to be lectured on aviation law by a passenger, and his masculinity was being challenged in front of his crew and a cabin full of observers. "Ma'am, you can cite whatever you want," he said, his voice rising slightly. "But on this aircraft, my word is final. You'll take the seat you're offered, or you'll find another flight." Maya nodded slowly. The threat was now on record, witnessed by multiple passengers and captured on several devices. "Captain, are you saying that federal aviation regulations don't apply on your aircraft?" "I'm saying I decide how to run my aircraft within those regulations." "And you believe those regulations permit you to deny confirmed reservations based on passenger appearance?" Mitchell realized he was being drawn into a trap, but his anger was overriding his judgment. "This has nothing to do with appearance." "Then what does it have to do with Mr. Kellerman hasn't shown anyone his boarding pass? Your flight attendant admitted he received special accommodation based on their personal relationship." I have a confirmed reservation. What factor other than appearance explains your decision to support his claim over mine? Mitchell looked around the cabin, suddenly aware that every word was being recorded and could be played back in a courtroom. The passengers were staring at him with expressions ranging from fascination to disgust. He'd walked into a situation assuming he could simply assert his authority and make the problem go away. Instead, he'd found himself being dealt with by a passenger who knew more about aviation law than he did. "Ma'am, you have 30 seconds to accept our accommodation offer," he said finally. "After that, you'll be removed from this aircraft." Maya smiled for the first time since boarding. "Captain, I think that would be a very poor decision. But if that's what you choose to do, I want to make sure you understand exactly who you're removing." Maya reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her movements deliberate and calm despite the tension crackling through the cabin. The other passengers leaned forward slightly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even Brad, who had been trying to remain invisible in seat 1A, was watching with obvious nervousness. Captain Mitchell Maya said, her voice taking on a different quality, not louder but somehow more authoritative. "Before you make your final decision, I think there are some things you should know." Mitchell crossed his arms, his face set in stubborn lines. "Ma'am, nothing you can say is going to change the fact that you need to comply with crew instructions." "I understand your position," Maya replied, "but I want to make sure you're making an informed decision. Because once you remove me from this aircraft, there won't be an opportunity to reconsider." Rebecca was looking between Maya and Mitchell with growing unease. Something in Maya's tone had changed, and even through her anger and embarrassment, Rebecca was beginning to sense that she might have miscalculated. Maya opened her phone and scrolled to her contacts. "Captain, are you familiar with Richardson Global Ventures?" Mitchell's brow furrowed. "Should I be?" "Probably. We're a private equity firm specializing in distressed company acquisitions and turnarounds. We've done 43 acquisitions in the past 20 years. Maya tapped her screen and held the phone to her ear. The cabin was so quiet that her voice carried clearly to every passenger. "Carmen, it's Maya. I need you to confirm something for me." "Yes, the Skybridge acquisition. What time was the final transfer completed?" She paused, listening to her assistant's response. 6:47 p.m. Eastern. "Thank you. And Carmen, execute Protocol 7 immediately." "Yes, the full documentation package." "I understand." "No, there's no mistake." Maya ended the call and looked at Mitchell, whose face had gone from red to pale as he processed what he'd just heard. "Captain, at 6:47 this evening, about an hour ago, Richardson Global Ventures completed the acquisition of Skybridge Airlines. The purchase price was $1.8 billion. The cabin erupted in whispers. Maya could hear passengers murmuring to each other, phones buzzing with rapid typing, and somewhere behind her, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Mitchell's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Rebecca looked like she'd been struck by lightning. "My name is Maya Richardson." Maya continued, her voice calm and clear. "I'm the founder and CEO of Richardson Global Ventures. As of 1 hour ago, I own this airline." The silence that followed was so complete that Maya could hear the aircraft's ventilation system cycling. Every eye in the cabin was fixed on her, and she could see the rapid mental recalculations happening on every face. Brad was the first to find his voice. You own Skybridge." "I do," Maya confirmed, "which makes this situation particularly interesting. Captain Mitchell, Ms. Morrison, you've just threatened to remove the owner of your company from her own aircraft for requesting the seat she paid for." Mitchell's face had progressed through several colors and was now settling into an ashen gray. "Ma'am, if you had just identified yourself." "Captain." Maya interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. "Are you seriously suggesting that my right to be treated with dignity and respect depends on my job title? That the only reason you shouldn't discriminate against passengers is if they happen to own the company?" Mitchell opened his mouth, but no words came out. The logic was devastating and unanswerable. Rebecca was staring at Maya with the expression of someone watching her entire career collapse in real time. "Ms. Richardson, there's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" Maya asked. "Because from where I stand, the understanding was quite clear. You looked at a black woman in simple clothes and decided she didn't belong in first class. You created a false emergency to pressure me into accepting inferior service. You threatened to have me removed when I insisted on receiving what I paid for. The only misunderstanding was your assumption about who you were dealing with." Maya turned to address the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your travel plans. This aircraft is now grounded pending a complete investigation of what you've witnessed tonight." She pulled out her phone again and placed another call. "Maria, it's Maya. I need a full crew replacement for Flight SK-847. Yes, immediately. Captain Mitchell and Flight Attendant Morrison are terminated effective immediately. I'll explain later. How long for replacement crew? Understood." Maya hung up and looked at Mitchell, who appeared to be in shock. "Captain, you're relieved of duty. Please return to the terminal. Security will escort you." Mitchell found his voice. "You can't just fire me without due process." "Actually, I can," Maya said calmly. "Discrimination against passengers is grounds for immediate termination under company policy. Your threat to remove me based on my race violates federal law, and your refusal to follow proper procedures regarding confirmed reservations violates your certification requirements." Maya turned to Rebecca, who was now visibly trembling. "Ms. Morrison, you're also terminated. Your statements about where I belong based on my appearance constitute clear racial discrimination. Your unauthorized upgrade of Mr. Kellerman using personal relationships rather than proper procedures constitutes fraud. You'll be hearing from legal counsel regarding potential criminal charges." Rebecca's legs seemed to give out and she grabbed the back of a seat for support. "Please, I have a family. I've worked here for 25 years. And in those 25 years, how many passengers have you treated this way?" Maya asked quietly. "How many people who looked like me have you humiliated, displaced, or removed? How many complaints were filed against you that management dismissed?" Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Maya looked at Diego, who had been standing frozen near the galley throughout the entire confrontation. "Mr. Ramirez, you're suspended pending investigation. However, your cooperation with the investigation will be taken into consideration." Diego nodded quickly, relief flooding his face. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am." Maya addressed the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, a replacement crew will be here within the hour. Skybridge will provide meal vouchers and accommodation for any passenger who needs to stay overnight. Additionally, every passenger on this flight will receive a full refund and a credit for future travel." She looked at Brad, who had been trying to disappear into seat 1A. "Mr. Kellerman, I believe you need to return to the terminal as well. You'll be hearing from our legal department regarding fraudulent use of airline services." Brad scrambled out of the seat, grabbing his belongings and practically running toward the aircraft door. Maya finally settled into seat 1A. Her seat and looked around the cabin. The other passengers were staring at her with expressions of awe, shock, and admiration. The Hollywood producer was the first to speak. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like that in my life. That was the most impressive display of quiet power I've ever witnessed." Other passengers began to applaud the sound building until the entire cabin was clapping. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, believed, and supported. But this was just the beginning. What happened tonight would ripple through the airline industry and beyond, changing how thousands of people were treated every day. Maya had bought Skybridge to fix its problems. She just hadn't expected to start the repairs so personally. Maya sat in seat 1A, finally claiming what had always rightfully been hers, and observed the controlled chaos now unfolding around her. The cabin had become a mix of excitement, shock, and the peculiar energy that follows a dramatic revelation. Passengers were typing furiously on their phones, some making calls, others updating social media feeds that would soon carry this story across the internet. But Maya's focus was on the documentation that needed to happen next. She'd learned from 20 years of business acquisitions that the moment after a confrontation was crucial. Decisions made in the next few minutes would determine whether justice was temporary or permanent. She placed another call to Carmen. I need you to pull the complete employee files for Captain James Mitchell and Flight Attendant Rebecca Morrison. Full disciplinary history, all customer complaints, any internal memos or communications mentioning their names. Carmen's efficiency was one of the reasons Maya had succeeded in building her business empire. Within minutes, she was reading directly from personnel files. Mitchell has been with Skybridge for 12 years. 6 customer complaints filed against him, all dismissed. 4 related to what passengers described as discriminatory behavior, 2 for inappropriate conduct toward female passengers. Morrison has been with the company for 25 years. 18 complaints filed, 17 dismissed. Pattern of complaints predominantly from minority passengers alleging discriminatory treatment. Maya felt her anger deepen, but she kept her voice level. 18 complaints, all dismissed except 1. The one that wasn't dismissed was settled with a small voucher payment to avoid further escalation. No disciplinary action taken against Morrison. Maya closed her eyes briefly. This wasn't just individual racism. This was institutional protection of racist behavior. Skybridge management had been actively covering up discrimination for years, possibly decades. Carmen, I need you to contact Maria Santos immediately. Tell her to pull every complaint filed against any Skybridge employee in the past 5 years. I want patterns identified, settlements tracked, and any evidence of management cover-ups documented. Already on it, Carmen replied. Maya, there's something else. I've been monitoring social media since your call. Videos of this incident are already going viral. Skybridge scandal is trending on Twitter. CNN is calling for comment. Maya looked around the cabin, noting the passengers who were still filming and typing. In the age of social media, private discrimination had become public accountability. What happened in this cabin tonight wouldn't stay in this cabin. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning, Maya said. And Carmen, get me a meeting with the Department of Transportation. If Skybridge has been covering up discrimination complaints, the federal government needs to know. As Maya ended the call, she noticed Diego approaching hesitantly. The young flight attendant's face was a study in conflicted emotions, fear, shame, and something that might have been hope. Ms. Richardson, he said quietly, may I speak with you? Maya gestured to the empty seat beside her. Please. Diego sat down carefully as if he might flee at any moment. Ma'am, I want you to know that what happened tonight, it wasn't right. I should have spoken up earlier. Why didn't you? Maya asked, not unkindly. Diego's hands were shaking slightly. Because I was scared. Rebecca and Captain Mitchell. They've been flying together for years. They have influence with management. If you cross them... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. What would happen if you crossed them? Bad schedules, poor route assignments, negative performance reviews. They could make your life miserable, and management would back them up. Diego looked up at Maya. Ma'am, how many employees do you think have witnessed behavior like tonight and said nothing because they were afraid for their jobs? Maya felt the scope of the problem expanding in her mind. It wasn't just about Rebecca and Mitchell. It was about a culture that protected discrimination and punished anyone who challenged it. Diego, are you willing to tell me more about the culture, the patterns, the way things really work? Diego took a deep breath. Yes, ma'am. Everything I know. Because what happened to you tonight, it happens to other passengers too. And those of us who want to do right, we've been too scared to speak up. Maya's phone rang. Maria Santos. Maya, I've been digging into the complaint patterns. It's worse than we thought. Skybridge has a process for suppressing discrimination complaints. They're categorized as service issues rather than discrimination to avoid federal reporting requirements. Settlements are structured as customer service gestures to prevent legal action. Maya put the call on speaker so Diego could hear. How extensive is this? I've identified over 200 complaints in the past 5 years that appear to be discrimination-related, but were classified as something else. The pattern is clear: minority passengers are consistently given inferior service, subjected to additional scrutiny, and removed from flights at disproportionate rates. Diego leaned forward. Ma'am, can I add something? There are group chats among certain crew members. They use coded language, but they basically coordinate how to handle what they call problem passengers. And those passengers are almost always minorities or people who don't look like they can afford first-class tickets. Maya felt a cold fury building in her chest. This wasn't isolated incidents or individual bias. This was organized discrimination. Maria, I need you to subpoena those chat records. Diego, are you willing to provide access to those conversations? Yes, ma'am. Whatever it takes to fix this. Maya looked around the cabin at the passengers who were still watching, still recording, still bearing witness to this moment. She realized that what had started as a personal humiliation had become something much larger, an opportunity to expose and eliminate widespread discrimination across an entire industry. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, addressing the cabin again, what you witnessed tonight is not an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern of discrimination that has been protected and enabled by airline management for years. Your witness testimony and recordings are not just documenting my experience. You're documenting evidence that will help us ensure this never happens to anyone else. The applause that followed was different from before. Not just appreciation for her handling of the situation, but recognition of the larger significance of what was happening. Maya was no longer just fixing a seating dispute. She was dismantling a system of discrimination that had operated in shadows for too long. Maya's phone buzzed continuously as the scope of the investigation expanded beyond the confines of the aircraft cabin. She could see the passengers around her fielding calls from friends and family who had seen the viral videos, and she knew that in boardrooms and newsrooms across the country, people were scrambling to understand the implications of what had just happened. Carmen called back within minutes with updates that confirmed Maya's worst fears about the depth of the problems at Skybridge. Maya, I've been in contact with 3 law firms that specialize in civil rights cases. They're all reporting that they've had clients who've complained about Skybridge specifically. One firm says they've been tracking patterns of discrimination complaints against the airline for 2 years, waiting for the right case to pursue class action litigation. Maya felt the weight of those words. Other people had suffered what she'd just experienced. Other passengers had been humiliated, displaced, and dismissed. The difference was that most of them hadn't had the resources or platform to fight back effectively. What kind of patterns, she asked. Disproportionate security screenings, frequent challenges to ticket validity for minority passengers, downgrading of service based on passenger appearance, and consistent dismissal of complaints through what the lawyers are calling predatory settlement practices. Maya looked at Diego, who was listening intently. Diego, in your experience, how often do situations like tonight occur? Diego's face was troubled. More than you'd think, but usually not this publicly. Most passengers just accept whatever they're told because they don't want to miss their flight or cause a scene. The crew members who do this, they're good at making it seem like the passenger is the problem. Maya's phone rang again. This time it was Robert Patterson, Skybridge's chief operating officer, a man who as of an hour ago was now her employee. Ms. Richardson, I just heard about the incident on flight SK-847. I want to assure you that this behavior doesn't represent our company values. Mr. Patterson, Maya interrupted. Are you aware that Rebecca Morrison has had 18 discrimination complaints filed against her over the past few years? Silence on the line. Then I would need to review her personnel file. I've already reviewed it. 18 complaints, 17 dismissed without investigation. How do you explain that pattern? More silence. Maya could practically hear Patterson calculating how to minimize the situation. Sometimes complaints are filed when passengers are dissatisfied with service that's actually within policy guidelines. Mr. Patterson, I'm going to stop you there, Maya said, her voice taking on the edge she used in hostile board meetings. I own this company now. You work for me. And I'm telling you that what happened tonight was not within policy guidelines, it was criminal discrimination. The question now is whether you were complicit in covering it up or merely incompetent in preventing it. Patterson's voice became strained. Ma'am, if there have been procedural failures, we can certainly review and improve our complaint handling processes. There haven't been procedural failures, Mr. Patterson. There have been deliberate decisions to protect racist employees and silence their victims. And you were either part of that conspiracy or asleep at your job. Which was it? The phone went silent for so long that Maya thought the call had dropped. Finally, Patterson spoke again. Ms. Richardson, perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting. No, Mr. Patterson. We'll discuss this in federal court if necessary. But first, you're going to help me understand exactly how deep this rot goes in my new company. Maya ended the call and immediately placed another one to Maria Santos. Maria, I need you to expand the investigation to include senior management. I want to know who knew about the discrimination patterns, who authorized the complaint dismissals, and who profited from keeping victims quiet. Already working on it, Maria replied. Maya. I'm also getting calls from other airline employees, not just Skybridge but other carriers. They're saying this problem is industry-wide. What happened to you tonight is apparently common enough that flight attendants and pilots joke about it in private. Maya felt the scope of the problem expanding again. This wasn't just about Skybridge. This was about an entire industry that had normalized discrimination and protected it through corporate structures. Diego, she said, turning to the young flight attendant. Are you aware of discrimination happening at other airlines? Diego nodded reluctantly. Ma'am, flight crew members talk to each other. We know people at different carriers. And, yeah, stories like tonight. They happen everywhere. Some airlines are worse than others, but it's not like Skybridge is unique. Maya stood up and addressed the cabin again. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to ask something of you. What you witnessed tonight appears to be part of a much larger pattern of discrimination across the airline industry. If any of you have experienced similar treatment on any airline, or if you know someone who has, I want you to contact my office. We're going to make sure this stops not just at Skybridge, but everywhere. She handed out business cards to passengers who came forward, and within minutes she'd collected contact information from people who had their own stories of discrimination. A black businessman who'd been questioned about his first-class ticket on 3 different airlines. A Latina doctor who'd been asked to move out of business class to make room for a more appropriate passenger. An elderly Asian man who'd been subjected to additional security screening on every flight he'd taken in the past year. The scope of the problem was becoming clear. What had started as a personal affront was revealing itself as a civil rights crisis that had been hiding in plain sight. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Carmen D.O.T. Secretary wants to speak with you ASAP. Also, CNN, ABC, and NYT all requesting interviews. This is bigger than we thought. Maya looked around the cabin at the passengers who were now partners in exposing and fixing widespread discrimination. She thought about Diego, who was risking his career to tell the truth. She thought about all the other passengers who had endured what she'd experienced, but hadn't had the platform to fight back. She was no longer just the owner of an airline. She was the leader of a movement to transform an entire industry. Maya noticed that the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from shock to something approaching determination. The passengers weren't just witnesses anymore. They were becoming advocates. She could see them forming small groups, sharing their own experiences, exchanging contact information, and making plans to support whatever came next. The Hollywood producer from seat 2A approached her with his phone still recording. "Ms. Richardson, may I ask you something? How long have you known you were going to buy Skybridge?" Maya considered the question carefully. The acquisition negotiations took about 6 months, but I've been tracking discrimination patterns in the airline industry for much longer than that, so tonight wasn't coincidence. Not entirely, Maya admitted. I always fly my own aircraft when possible, but when I acquire a company, I believe in experiencing it from the customer's perspective. Tonight was supposed to be a quiet assessment flight. I just didn't expect the assessment to be quite so dramatic. A woman from seat 3B leaned forward. "Ms. Richardson, I'm a federal prosecutor. What I witnessed tonight constitutes clear violation of several federal statutes. Are you planning to pursue criminal charges?" Maya felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the support but for the recognition from a legal professional that this was more than just poor customer service. "Absolutely," she replied. "Both civil and criminal. Discrimination in public accommodations violates federal law, and conspiracy to suppress civil rights complaints is a federal crime. But more importantly, I want to change the culture that allowed this to happen." Diego had been listening to the conversation, and Maya could see him processing the implications. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? When you bought Skybridge, did you know about the discrimination problems I suspected them?" Maya said, honestly. The complaint patterns, the employee turnover data, the customer satisfaction scores broken down by demographic groups, they all suggested problems. But I needed to confirm the suspicions before I could address them. "So, you knew you might face discrimination when you boarded tonight?" Maya nodded. "I've faced discrimination my entire career. The difference is that tonight I was in a position to do something about it immediately." Diego looked around the cabin, taking in the passengers who were still documenting everything still supporting Maya's position. "Ma'am, do you think this will really change anything, or will it just die down after a few news cycles?" It was a fair question, and Maya knew the answer would determine whether tonight's events became a footnote or a turning point. "Diego, that depends on all of us," she said. "Change doesn't happen because one person gets angry or one video goes viral. Change happens when enough people decide they won't tolerate the status quo anymore." She stood up and addressed the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be clear about something. What happened tonight was wrong, but it wasn't unique. Every day, passengers who look like me or Diego or many of you are treated as if they don't belong, as if their dignity doesn't matter, as if their money isn't as good as someone else's." Maya paused, looking around at the faces that were now hanging on her every word. "But what is unique is that this time we're all here together. We all witnessed it, we all recorded it, and we all have the opportunity to make sure it never happens again. Not just on Skybridge flights, but anywhere." Her phone rang. Carmen again. "Maya, the story is exploding. Skybridge. Discrimination is now trending worldwide. The Secretary of Transportation wants to meet with you tomorrow. The NAACP is calling. The pilots' union is demanding a statement. And Maya, 3 other airline CEOs have called to discuss industry-wide reforms." Maya felt the momentum building. Carmen scheduled the DOT meeting for tomorrow morning. Accept the NAACP invitation, and tell those CEOs that any conversation about reforms needs to include passenger advocates and civil rights attorneys, not just industry executives. As Maya hung up, she noticed that Captain Mitchell and Rebecca Morrison were being escorted off the aircraft by airline security. Rebecca was crying, her 25-year career ending in humiliation and legal jeopardy. Mitchell walked off with his shoulders squared, but his face ashen, clearly understanding that his flying days were over. Maya felt no satisfaction in their departures. Their individual fates were less important than the changes their behavior had made possible. "Diego, She said, "I want you to know that your honesty and cooperation are going to help protect other employees who want to do the right thing. From now on, Skybridge will have zero tolerance for discrimination and zero tolerance for retaliation against employees who report it." Diego's relief was visible. "Thank you, ma'am. There are a lot of good people working for this company who've been frustrated by not being able to speak up." Maya smiled. "Then let's give them their voices back." Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Maria Santos, whose investigation was expanding faster than anyone had anticipated. Maya put the call on speaker so the passengers in the cabin could hear the findings that would soon reshape their understanding of airline discrimination. "Maya, what we're uncovering is extensive. I've now documented discrimination complaints against Skybridge from 47 passengers in the past 3 years alone. But here's the shocking part. None of them were properly investigated. They were all categorized as service disputes and resolved with small vouchers or credits." The passengers in this cabin leaned in closer, understanding that they were hearing evidence of institutional discrimination being documented in real time. "What's the racial breakdown of the complaints?" Maya asked. 83% were filed by minority passengers. Black passengers filed 61% of the complaints, Latino passengers filed 14%, Asian passengers filed 8%. White passengers filed only 17%, and those were mostly related to flight delays or lost luggage actual service issues. Diego shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Ma'am, that matches what I've seen. The complaints that come through our system from minority passengers are almost always about how they were treated by crew members, but they get classified as misunderstandings or communication problems." Maya looked around the cabin, noting that several passengers were recording this conversation. She was building a legal record in real time with dozens of witnesses. "Maria, have you identified other employees besides Morrison and Mitchell who have patterns of discrimination, complaints?" 12 flight attendants and 4 pilots have multiple complaints following the same patterns. All complaints dismissed or minimally resolved. "Maya, this isn't random bias. This is organized discrimination with institutional protection." The federal prosecutor from Seat 3B spoke up. "Ms. Richardson, what you're describing constitutes conspiracy under federal civil rights law. If management was dismissing valid discrimination complaints to avoid liability, that's criminal behavior." Maya nodded grimly. "Maria, I need you to document everything for criminal referral to the Justice Department. And I need a complete audit of management communications related to these complaint dismissals. Already working on it. Maya, there's something else. I've been contacted by employees from 3 other major airlines. They're saying similar patterns exist at their companies. This might be industry-wide." Maya felt the weight of that revelation. Put together a secure system for airline employees to report discrimination patterns anonymously. If this is industry-wide, we need to document the full scope. They paused at gate B-17, the same gate where Maya had boarded flight SK-847. A young black woman was checking in for a first-class flight, interacting with a gate agent who processed her ticket with the same efficiency and courtesy shown to all passengers. Maya felt a deep satisfaction watching the interaction that would have been unremarkable to anyone else, but represented profound progress to her. Diego. The real measure of our success is that young woman will never experience what I experienced. She'll board her flight expecting to be treated with dignity, and that expectation will be met. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Carmen Maya. The European Union just announced they're adopting Richardson Protocol standards for all airlines operating in EU airspace. This is now a global movement. Maya smiled, realizing that what had started as a personal affront had become an international standard for human dignity in transportation. As she and Diego walked toward the exit, Maya reflected on how individual courage could create institutional change that outlasted any single person or moment. The girl from Birmingham, who had learned about dignity from her father, had found a way to extend that dignity to millions of travelers around the world. The transformation was complete, but the work would continue. Maya Richardson walked through the main terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest airport in the world, observing changes that represented the new reality of air travel in America. The Richardson Protocol had become as standard as security screening implemented across every major airline and monitored by federal agencies with the same rigor applied to safety regulations. She was traveling to Birmingham, Alabama to speak at the dedication of the Maya Richardson Civil Rights Wing at the airport, where she had experienced her first airline discrimination 15 years earlier. The irony was not lost on her that the same airport that had once represented humiliation was now becoming a symbol of progress. Diego Ramirez, now serving as Chief Advocate Officer for the Air Transport Association, met Maya at the gate. His transformation from frightened flight attendant to industry leader represented the kind of institutional change Maya had hoped to create. Ms. Richardson. I wanted to give you an update on the numbers, Diego said as they walked toward her connecting gate. Discrimination complaints across the airline industry have decreased by 94% in the past year. Employee confidence in reporting bias has increased by 400%. Customer satisfaction among minority passengers has reached all-time highs. Maya felt deep satisfaction in the data, but she was more interested in the human stories behind the numbers. What about retaliation against employees who report discrimination? She asked. Virtually eliminated, Diego replied. The combination of federal oversight and independent advocacy programs has made retaliation too risky for management to tolerate. Employees know they'll be protected for doing the right thing. As they passed a customer service desk, Maya noticed a scene that would have been remarkable a year earlier, but was now routine. A white supervisor publicly commending a Latino employee for reporting potential bias by a colleague. The discrimination had been prevented, the reporting employee was being praised, and the colleague was receiving additional training rather than punishment. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Carmen Maya. The UN Human Rights Council just approved the Richardson Standard as a recommended framework for transportation equity globally. Your work is becoming international law. 3 months later, Maya received an invitation that demonstrated how far the ripple effects of Flight SK-847 had spread. The European Parliament wanted her to address their session on global civil rights in transportation, as the European Union was considering legislation that would apply Richardson Protocol standards to all forms of public transit. Standing before members of Parliament from 27 countries, Maya reflected on how a single moment of refusing to accept discrimination had become a global movement for human dignity. Honorable members, Maya began what we learned from investigating airline discrimination is that bias in one industry reveals bias in all industries. Transportation is where discrimination becomes most visible because it involves people from different backgrounds sharing the same spaces, competing for the same services, and expecting the same treatment. Maya's testimony led to the passage of the European Transportation Equity Act, which applied civil rights monitoring to trains, buses, airlines, and maritime transport across the European Union. The global impact extended beyond transportation. The Richardson Protocol had been adapted by hotel chains, restaurant companies, retail corporations, and technology platforms as a framework for identifying and eliminating discriminatory practices. Maya received regular updates on how her work was influencing civil rights enforcement worldwide. Brazil had created a national ombudsman system for transportation discrimination. Japan had implemented bias training requirements for all customer service employees. South Africa had established an independent civil rights monitoring agency for public accommodation. But the impact Maya was most proud of was in education. The Richardson case study was now taught in business schools, law schools, and public policy programs as an example of how individual courage could create institutional change. Students around the world were learning that civil rights were not abstract principles, but practical frameworks that required constant vigilance and active protection. Maya's phone rang with a call from the dean of Harvard Business School, where she had earned her MBA 20 years earlier. Ms. Richardson, We want to establish the Richardson Center for Civil Rights Leadership here at Harvard. We believe your work represents a new model for how business leaders can address social justice issues. Maya felt the weight of academic recognition, but she was more interested in practical impact than institutional prestige. Dean Williams: I'd be honored, but I want the center to focus on training the next generation of business leaders to recognize and eliminate discrimination in their own organizations. Theory is less important than practice. 2 years after Flight SK-847, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at Spelman College, her alma mater delivering the commencement address to a graduating class that had grown up watching her transform personal humiliation into global change. Members of the class of 2025. Maya began looking out at young faces that represented the future of civil rights leadership. You are graduating into a world where equality is no longer a distant goal, but a daily expectation. The Richardson Protocol that protects your right to dignity in transportation exists because one night I decided that accepting discrimination was more expensive than fighting it. Maya paused, seeing her younger self in the faces of students who would soon enter a professional world that was more just because of the work she had done. But your generation faces new challenges that require the same courage and persistence that every civil rights generation has shown. Discrimination evolves, but so does our capacity to recognize and eliminate it. Your job is not to maintain the progress we've made. Your job is to extend that progress to places and people we haven't yet reached. The standing ovation that followed was sustained and emotional, but Maya was thinking about the work that remained. Civil rights were not a destination, but a journey that required constant vigilance and active protection. After the ceremony, Maya met with students who wanted careers in civil rights advocacy, social justice, entrepreneurship, and business leadership that prioritized equity alongside profitability. Ms. Richardson, a young black woman, asked, "What advice would you give to someone who faces discrimination in their workplace but doesn't have your platform or resources?" Maya thought carefully about her response, remembering her own fear and uncertainty before she had acquired the power to fight back effectively. Document everything. Build alliances with colleagues who share your values. Know your rights under federal law, and remember that every civil rights advance in history started with someone who had less power than their opponents, but more courage than their fears. As Maya left the campus where she had first learned about business leadership, she reflected on how her understanding of success had evolved. 25 years earlier, she had measured success by wealth accumulation and business achievements. Now she measured success by the number of people who could travel, work, and live with dignity because of systems she had helped create. Her phone buzzed with a message from Diego Maya. "Just wanted you to know that a young flight attendant in Denver reported bias by a colleague today. The passenger was protected. The reporter was praised, and the colleague is receiving training. The system works because you built it to work." Maya smiled, understanding that the most lasting legacy was not in awards or recognition, but in the countless moments when people chose dignity over discrimination, because systems existed to support and protect those choices. She had started as a billionaire who happened to experience discrimination. She had become a civil rights leader whose work would protect generations of travelers who would never know her name but would benefit from her courage. The transformation was complete, but the legacy would continue forever. If this story moved you, remember that change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. Every voice matters. Every witness counts. Every moment of courage creates possibilities for justice. Share your own experiences, support others who face discrimination, and never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to stay silent. Because dignity isn't given. It's claimed, defended, and preserved through the daily choices we make to treat others with the respect every human being deserves. And remember, If you enjoyed this story of courage, transformation, and justice, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of people who refused to accept discrimination and changed the world because of it. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could inspire your own moment of courage. Because when we share stories of justice, we create a world where dignity isn't a privilege, but a right that belongs to everyone. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters, your dignity matters, and your courage can change everything.